for now, we're going to be speaking with and hearing from Ginger and Peter Niemann. The first time I remember meeting Ginger and Peter, could have been before that but the one I remember sticks in my head is when they were dancing at Shoal Marina. And my partner Tom said, "Oh yeah, they bring their little boombox up and they dance up there by the marina." And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And now, after their second circumnavigation, we're delighted that they're subleasing a slip from us in Shoal, and we'll be moving to Port Townsend soon. Yay! Although Orcas would be a great place to live, but no grandchildren there. So at this point, then, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to let Ginger and Peter introduce themselves, share their screens, and take us on this beautiful journey.
Hi, my name is Ginger. My husband Peter and I are a sailing cruising team of 2. Our home port is in the seafaring district of Seattle, Ballard, Washington. We have just recently returned home from a circumnavigation of the world aboard our ketch, Irene. Here's the story of our 5-year voyage of endurance. It began with a vague idea to sail northern waters. We have a heavily built, long keel fiberglass ketch with a 6-foot draft. Irene is safe and comfortable in a storm, but lacked shelter for a watchkeeper. So we built a doghouse to keep us warm in cold weather. We also beefed up our autopilot and added good cabin heaters and new sails and rigging. Our ideas became more specific, and we realized we wanted to give the famed and dangerous Northwest Passage a try. After all the preparations of departing for a multi-year voyage, it felt good to finally be underway, sailing in brisk, chill winds. As we sailed into the Bering Sea, we were in new territory. At Nome, we stopped to wait for ice conditions to improve further north. It was an entertaining place. Wacky gold dredge vessels were everywhere in the port, with camera crews roving about town filming for reality TV. Sailboats, mostly metal, high-latitude adventure vessels, arrived daily and, like us, waited for the pack ice to break up. We took walks in the hills behind town where the blueberries were plentiful and delicious, and where wild muskoxen roamed. In town, we chatted with the other crews heading our way, and all the sailors were speculating on when the ice pack would allow us to leave. The Northwest Passage is a long route in very sparsely populated territory. There are only a few possibilities for reprovisioning fuel and groceries. Although global warming has drastically reduced the total ice pack, winds and currents often push masses of smaller ice chunks together, which collect in vast fields and block the route that no small boat can penetrate. After a few days, we departed Nome, not the first and not the last boat to leave Nome that season. We sailed north and rounded Point Barrow and continued eastward. We could see ice only on the radar at first, and sense its presence by chill air and unusually small waves for the wind strength. Soon we encountered areas of ice patches and had fun zigzagging through the bits. It was tiring work with constant steering and sail handling. Irene is tiller steered, which is an advantage for quick steering and gives the helmsman a great view, but it was a bit exposed in the chill wind. We spotted polar bears as we approached shelter behind a low island. Shore leave officially canceled, but we appreciated a good long sleep after several days of nonstop travel. The shallow water in this part of the passage kicks up a steep, short sea very quickly. The winds were good and we were able to sail quite a bit. We were making steady progress and pleased to be not using much fuel at this stage of the passage. A scientist ashore took these images of Irene as we departed a research station. The land was flat and treeless, so it was easy to spot evidence of habitation or industry. We sailed out of the USA and into Canada and to the village of Tuktoyaktuk. It was a warm place in a southerly wind. We were surprised to see a local speedboat zip around, towing floaty toys with children inside. Our next stop at Cambridge Bay is roughly the halfway point of the Northwest Passage. It is a port that supplies the region, as well as a big native village. We topped off our diesel tanks in fresh fruit and veggies and downloaded ice maps and detailed weather forecasts. Here, we met several westbound boats, including one from our home, Seattle. We traded advice and stories. We were poised to enter the thickest ice, and the westbound boats had plenty of tales of close calls with both ice and polar bears. Departing Cambridge Bay, we experienced some of the optical illusions and disorientation that plagued the early explorers. This image shows a white wall on the horizon called ice blink. There is no wall or land, but there is ice on the sea surface miles away from us, beyond the horizon, causing this reflection. In the hundreds of miles between habitations, the sense of isolation was intense. A small gap in the ice that had allowed a rush of boats through ahead of us had now closed, and we had missed it. Some of our friends had gotten trapped, iced into a bay 75 miles short of clear water. We sat and waited, hoping for a change. For a week, we watched the calendar, knowing that the possibility of a safe retreat was closing as the days got shorter and colder. One morning, up the mast for maintenance, we spotted what looked like masts in the next bay. Binoculars confirmed it was a schooner we had last seen in Cambridge Bay. After a chat on the VHF radio with the schooner Able Tasman, we learned that they had made an attempt to get through the ice. They were completely thwarted in their effort and had bent their propeller in the attempt. They were as happy to see another boat as we were to see them. In such a wilderness, another boat can be the difference between life and death. We agreed to travel together for the next section, a tough area with a heavy ice pack. There was a small window of opportunity, and we decided to take it. In the early morning hours, we hauled anchor and followed them at a brisk 7 knots into an icy fog. We saw more polar bears, and they looked healthy, an exciting sight no matter how many we saw. They were fearless of our boat, sniffing the air and our scent, looking for the scent of food, likely our scent and the scent of food, the same thing to them. In the thickest ice, we steered by tiller, but often in more open patches, we were able to steer with the autopilot, sitting in the more protected doghouse. At times, we just drifted, waiting to find an ice lead. Ice stretched into the distance for hundreds of miles in every direction. Funny enough, the ice made for more striking scenery than the flat Arctic land we had sailed past for weeks. At the edge of the thick ice pack, we rendezvoused with a Norwegian tug called Tandberg Polar, towing the Maud, a recovered Arctic exploration vessel, originally commissioned by Roald Amundsen 100 years ago. The tug took the lead of our little group. The tug was not an ice-breaking vessel. In fact, their tow was more fragile than any sailboat, but they had a good viewpoint from their mast and a wonderful pathfinding skill through the ice. And so our flotilla, slowly, no faster than 3 knots, picked a way through the ice for 4 days, 24/7. Sometimes we were able to sail and give the motor and our ears a bit of a rest. The 2 of us were fatigued, but coping well. All of us hoped the wind would be kind and allow us through the ice and not trap us for the winter. We made it. We cleared Bellet Strait, spirits were high, and the Norwegian captain of the tug called on the VHF channel 16 to say, "The ice has parted for the Maud." Now that a forced winter in the Arctic was unlikely, we anchored in the bay at Fort Ross for some rest and exploration. Seeing Able Tasman next to Irene from land, we realized how comparatively small we were. As we continued on alone again, we felt tiny among the mountainous islands. The landscape in this section of the passage is dramatic, with high islands, cliffs, and glaciers. At our highest point of the transit, we were only a few hundred miles from the magnetic North Pole, and the high islands were composed of ferrous rock. It was no surprise that our autopilot experienced difficulty holding a heading. We anchored to ride out some bad weather that was forecast with hurricane force winds. We had some invaluable assistance with weather and ice forecasting from Orcas Island resident Mike Scott and my sister back in Seattle. During a calm in the storm, we took advantage of the opportunity to transfer fuel from a flexible fuel tank on deck to below. It was colder now, and skim ice filled the bay. After a dramatic 3-day blow, we escaped our tenuous anchorage and resumed our journey. By day's end, we were surprised and pleased to see the Tandberg Polar with the Maud in tow, also underway ahead of us. Later that night, the wind built, and soon we were running under bare poles. We gave the Tandberg Polar a call to ask what their anemometer was reading. 75 knots of wind. Luckily, the seas were not big. We worked our way across Baffin Bay to Greenland. By now, mid-September, gales were a regular occurrence, and the days were short with the nights long and dark, so avoiding small icebergs was quite a concern for us. Our radar turned out to be very useful, reliably identifying dangerous ice called bergy bits and growlers lurking among the waves. With so many miles under the keel after Cambridge Bay, we were low on diesel fuel, so we were not able to run our heater during our 5-day crossing of Baffin Bay. The cabin temperature dropped to 41 degrees and stayed there. Everything was damp and condensation water dripped from the overhead and bulkheads. Hot water bottles helped us endure the numbing chill. Cold, but safe, we arrived in picturesque Osiot, Greenland. After a few days, Abel Tasman arrived, and a few days later, the Tandberg Polar and Maud. It was a true reunion. Refueled and refreshed, we resumed our trek south. Knowing that winter was coming, we were motivated to get down to more reasonable latitudes as soon as possible. We had a celebration as we crossed the Arctic Circle with Mai Tais, bowls of chili, and toasts to warmer weather. Though this passage was a personal goal and not inspired by obtaining an entry in a list of records, we are nonetheless proud to say that Irene is officially the 30th US vessel and overall 264th on the Cambridge Northwest Passage transit record. This record includes all vessels to transit from Arctic Circle to Arctic Circle, starting with Roald Amundsen in the Gjoa. That first successful transit took 3 years to complete, from 1903 to 1906. Dodging fall gales and hurricane remnants, we sailed south along the Canadian coasts of Labrador and Newfoundland. We sailed past Nova Scotia and Maine in short hops between storm systems. Then a long jump, nonstop, Portland, Maine to Norfolk, Virginia, to the Intracoastal Waterway, which we entered for a tranquil journey south. It was a time of recuperation as we had endured cold, sleeplessness, and stress, and now we could relax and warm up. We were looking for a quiet, warm spot to rest for the winter. We stopped for a time in South Carolina, where it snowed for the first time in years. We traveled even further south to Miami, Florida, until we were truly warm. After trying out a couple of anchorages in busy Biscayne Bay, what a nice surprise to find that we could anchor right downtown at South Beach, Miami. The warm weather turned downright hot, and we were finally warmed to the core. Hurricane season in the Atlantic was just around the corner, so we sailed back north, at sea this time, taking advantage of the northbound Gulf Stream current, and in no time we were right back in the Chesapeake. We hopped up Chesapeake Bay and sailed back out to sea via Delaware Bay. Then New York City, Long Island Sound, Cape Cod Canal, and on up to Maine. We were eager to see more of Nova Scotia, Canada, having passed by in such a rush the previous fall. We passed into brackish Bredor Lake through the locks at St. Peter. We gave Irene's bottom a quick scrub in warm Bredor water and headed to Ireland. We arrived in Bantry Bay, Ireland after a lively passage. What a pleasant surprise to find that a marina had been built since our cruising guide was written. The next weeks passed in a pleasant cruising blur. Pubs, great food, music, friends, history, pubs. Then we found ourselves in Scotland, and winter was coming. We tucked into a little harbor in Ardrossan on the Clyde and stayed put. After some serious winter storms and some serious drinking, spring arrived. We resumed cruising. Northbound geese marked the change of season. We anchored near castles, distilleries, locks, ancient stone quays. We admired solid stone buildings, many of them built hundreds of years ago, and enjoyed a wee drink every now and then in pubs with stone walls 3 feet thick. The cattle had horns. People called them coos and wee beasties. This coast has many protected bays and coves, perfect for quiet nights at anchor. We saw many ruined stone cottages and walls of abandoned settlements, remnants of the highland clearances, a forced depopulation of the region in the years between 1750 and 1860. There is a legal concept here in Scotland called right to roam. If a traveler leaves no garbage, closes the gates behind them, in short, behaves appropriately, he or she is allowed to walk everywhere. It was wonderful to anchor, row ashore, and climb the hills above Irene. We sailed north, anchoring in one beautiful bay after another. A short hop across open water brought us to Orkney, where we walked among prehistoric stones, the Ring of Brodgar, dating from 2600 BC. With sunrise at 3:30 a.m. this far north, it was a challenge to get there early enough to see the sun come up. We found puffins at Orkney too, but they only returned to their nests after sunset at 11 p.m. The nautical twilight lasted the rest of the night between sunset and sunrise, so traveling was easy any time of day here. We carried on across the North Sea to Denmark. As we arrive in each new country, we hoist the flag of that country in Irene's rig at the starboard spreaders, about halfway up the mast. This is an old seafaring tradition that identifies us, even at a distance, as a visiting vessel to onlookers. Sailing in Denmark was great fun. The water is shallow, so one must pay close attention to the channel markers to avoid running aground. The wind blows constantly right across the country, powering wind turbines to generate electricity and moving sailboats wherever they want to go. We sailed through Denmark on the Limfjord and then explored a bit of the Baltic. It was interesting to see evidence of Viking heritage. This sculpture is placed in a canal, now dry, that was dug in a narrow spot by Vikings to float their vessels across low land. The wind only eased up as we sailed into German waters. We took the Kiel Canal to return to the North Sea. We had to hand steer as the ships passed us, as hydraulic push and suction could either throw us up on the canal banks or pull us into the ship's propeller. Around each bend of the canal, we saw tranquil and beautiful scenes. A short hop in the North Sea, and we were in Dutch waters, packed with sailboats of all types. We've never seen so many traditional vessels sailing together. Peter was really enjoying the scene. In this shallow water, we paid close attention to staying in the channel. It was a unique day, sailing among the Dutch fleet. Crossing tacks with that large fleet of traditional leeboard craft in the Wadensee is a memory we will treasure forever. On our passages in the North Sea and the English Channel, we saw lots of commercial shipping. Always interesting, but always a danger to us too. We could never afford to let down our guard. Even a slight collision, a glancing blow, could be fatal to us. We tied up in a stone basin dating from the Napoleonic Wars in Saint-Malo, France, and walked to the beach. Then on to Sark in the Channel Islands between England and France, where most vehicles are forbidden and horses, bicycles, and foot traffic rule. We enjoyed a quiet, gentle, quiet time while we waited for the wind to blow in our direction for a jump south to Spain. We passed the lighthouse, Fer de Carillon, as we departed Brittany for the Bay of Biscay. The lighthouse is famously depicted in images with waves breaking over the top, and the Bay of Biscay is often notoriously rough and feared by many sailors. It was our pleasure to ghost past in light airs. Irene was leaving Northern Europe. and sailing into southern Europe on this passage. A steady wind across the Bay of Biscay brought us to Galicia in Spain. The weather turned warm, then hot. A special stop for us was to visit Salvora Lighthouse on the Atlantic Ocean. This national park island is only accessible by boat. Our southerly progress revealed the sun we had been craving since our winter in Scotland. What a pleasure to see Irene anchored in sun-drenched seascapes. After passing through the Straits of Gibraltar, we tied up at a marina for groceries and laundry. The Rock of Gibraltar is such an iconic waypoint. It was a bit surreal to finally be there. While coastal cruising, we normally anchor at night when possible. But the south coast of Spain proved difficult because there were few natural protected areas, and anchoring was frowned upon in general. We were tolerated at a few spots, but mostly cruisers stay at marinas in this part of the world. The beaches were packed with people trying to escape the brutal heat inland. The sun was merciless. It was just as hot as this looks. We cruised Spain, Tunisia, then to Italy, then a spectacular month in Greece during high summer. We hiked dry landscapes and visited Roman ruins. Since before we started cruising 17 years ago, it was a goal to eat lunch at a charming Greek cafe overlooking Irene, the stuff of good memories. Out of time because of EU rules, we sailed a few miles to Turkey. What an extraordinary experience to anchor under Lycian tombs dating back to 350 BC. Turkey made it easy to stay for a winter with temporary residency permits. In addition to some fantastic sightseeing, we were finally able to catch up on boat jobs. High on the list, varnishing the brightwork and spars. Here I am up the mainmast, pulling the tape from varnishing. It's typically my job to go up the rig in the sea if there's a need, at sea. We paddled up and down the river at Finiki, a coastal farming town in Turkey. Life was easy. The hills above were filled with Roman ruins. It was an idyllic time. This period was not exactly an adventure of endurance, but all that was about to change. COVID hit the world while we were in Turkey. As we watched the news of potential tension, political tension, rising in the region, we began to look for an escape route. The village became xenophobic. Where we had been welcome recently, we were now viewed with suspicion. We were confined aboard for a time, and then more restrictions were put in place. The police were called for a disturbance at the marina involving someone not quarantining to the satisfaction of another tenant. And another resident was threatened with arrest for swimming as the temperatures soared over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Confinement to the marina lasted for months, with no allowances for exercise or freedom of movement. On every national holiday, the Turkish national flag waves at the Finiki boatyard and on many homes. Much as we loved Turkey, we saw that the COVID-19 restrictions and dangers were likely to carry on for years. We felt that for our safety, it would be best to get closer to home. We searched for a way to get home, but with Irene, we were not interested in leaving the boat and flying home. In July, we saw that Indonesia was open, and this seemed the perfect opportunity to leapfrog to Southeast Asia and within striking distance of home. We sent our documents ahead in preparation for our arrival at Nongsa Point Marina on the south side of the Singapore Strait. With Indonesia in our sights, we made a plan to go through the Suez Canal and sail direct to Indonesia, where we've been assured a welcome. We enjoyed seeing the Latin-rigged sailing boats in Egypt. We were hot. The Red Sea was beautiful, but even hotter than Egypt. Red dust covered everything in the cabin, and we both suffered heat rash. What we had thought of as heat in the Med, we now realized was merely warm compared to the Red Sea in summer. Swallows lined our lifelines and flew freely through the cabin. They perched on cabin lights and mirrors and were completely unafraid of us. At anchor in Djibouti, just south of the Red Sea, the days were hot and the nights often had fierce thunderstorms. We were too hot to move much during the day. During the storms at night, we worried about our anchor dragging. One night, our anchor alarm sounded and brought us immediately on deck. The anchor was dragging and the buffeting wind was taking us rapidly toward shore. As we fought to remain oriented in the crisis, terrifying lightning flashed continuously and pelting rain was a distraction. We raised the anchor, removed an errant plastic bag from the tip, repositioned Irene and dropped the anchor again, hoping for a garbage-free spot. The hulk of a big power yacht that had recently been blown ashore and wrecked was ominously visible in the lightning flashes. After a few days of trying and failing to get permission to go ashore, we arranged with our scallywag of an agent, Moustique, to get some wilted vegetables, bottled water, and diesel delivered to us at anchor. Now that we were as reprovisioned as possible, we set out into the Gulf of Aden. The southwest monsoon was at full power, and we flew out into the Indian Ocean. This is traditionally pirate territory. But we didn't worry. The seas were huge as the wind blew steadily in the 30-knot range. This is pirate country, and we had charts and protocol to follow. A multinational coalition of military forces patrols these waters, and we were called on the radio by aircraft flying overhead. We reported our position daily to the coalition and received back cheery messages, making these piratey waters a little less intimidating. But our main anti-pirate defense was the weather. No pirate skiffs could operate in these conditions. At one point near the island of Socotra, where the wind blows fiercely, we hailed a big container ship to verify wind speed. 59 knots, steady, gusting to 64 was his answer. We were enduring conditions that normally would stop us. We would heave to, a method of adjusting sails and rudder to park the boat and ride the waves comfortably like a duck. But we could not linger in pirate regions, and this wind was forecast to last for weeks. So we thundered on. Cooking was impossible. The motion so violent and the cabin so hot. We hung on and subsisted on crackers and water for a few days. Struck by lightning or saltwater intrusion or both, our autopilot failed just as we entered the Malacca Strait. After a full day of troubleshooting at sea, we were unable to regain any functionality. Remember our tiller steering? The wind vane can steer if there's wind, but under power, we must hand steer at the tiller, fully exposed to the elements. Which we do off and on for the next 11 days and 600 miles. Rain or shine, through some of the most crowded water in the world, full of shipping and fishing vessels. This was truly an endurance feat for our small crew of 2. Arriving in Indonesia, where we had assurances that we would be welcome, we were met at the dock by a large group of officials and told that the rules had changed and we must leave immediately. After some serious negotiation, they did allow us to stay, confined to the marina, long enough to attempt some repairs and look for a port of refuge. All countries in a 2,500-mile radius, Malaysia, Thailand, Brunei, Philippines, Taiwan, Vietnam, Hong Kong, were closed to us. Only Singapore would accept us, and only if we did not land ashore, ever. Grateful for a safe place to stop, at Singapore's Changi Sailing Club, we stayed on a mooring for 5 months. We ordered groceries online, and through a laborious process, they were eventually delivered to the boat, sometimes partially cooked by the sun. We looked forward to the weekly race series for entertainment. We fixed our autopilot with the help of a technician giving fault tracing instructions over the phone. Friends, Captain Fatty and Carolyn Goodlander, kindly took our debit card and PIN number ashore to get cash for us to pay. Parts were delivered to the beach by taxi, and we rode ashore to pick them up. Maintenance logistics can be difficult while in permanent quarantine. 2 other cruising boats were on moorings there, and as there were few restrictions on people visiting us after our first 30 days of quarantine, we enjoyed some social evenings aboard Irene. The days were hot and rolly with wakes, but the evenings were serene and almost cool in this equatorial region. We easily slipped into some routines. Every week we jumped in the water and spent several hours scraping marine growth off Irene's bottom. Every 2 weeks, we dropped the mooring and motored to a pontoon to refill our water tanks. We endured our quarantine for 5 months. As the season advanced, the risk of tropical storms diminished. The timing was right to resume our journey home. We corresponded with officials in Japan, and it seemed that we could actually get visas to land there. The only downside, we would need to sail direct 1,500 nautical miles upwind to get to Japan. Irene's bottom was foul with marine growth from sitting still for so long, and her sails were blown out of shape from sailing so many miles. So we weren't sure how she would do with so much upwind sailing. We sailed nonstop past Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Borneo, the Philippines, Taiwan, all places we would really have liked to visit. And we arrived in Japan. And the officials, dozens of them, all true to their word, gave us pratique and issued visas, cruising permits, and other documents allowing us to cruise Japanese waters. Those first few weeks, free to walk ashore, were heaven. We sailed to the nearby island of Zamami, where the views were gorgeous. We walked around town and on the beautiful and mostly deserted beaches. For us, we had found paradise. We savored our freedom ashore. In fact, often now we're still struck by the ease with which we are free to do normal daily activities. And of course, the miles sailed had taken a toll on us and Irene. Our headsail furler foil needed an emergency repair, so we dropped the gear on the quay and fixed it. The job was much more easily accomplished because we had the luxury of space to work. In the south of Japan, in Okinawa, we experienced near perfect sailing weather in tropical waters. On 2 adjacent islands, statues had been placed to commemorate a dog who for years faithfully, daily, swam a channel between islands to visit his girlfriend. This statue is Marilyn waiting for her boyfriend. We love the sentimentality of these communities. We planned to sail north through Japan and had 3 months to explore before summer weather would allow us to cross the North Pacific to Alaska. It was a wonderful surprise to find out how enjoyable cruising Japan turned out to be. Sailing up the chain of islands, the Coast Guard monitored us every step of the way. At first, it was a bit disconcerting, but we grew to enjoy our predictable interactions with Japanese officials. Anchoring is rare in Japan, so we tied up in a variety of small ports protected by breakwaters. Be safe is a common sentiment here. Many mirrors are placed to help drivers and pedestrians in blind spots. We tied up under the restored Hirado Castle, a dramatic site of old Japan. Google Translate turned out to be very useful. Something as mundane as washing clothes can be quite a challenge, and Translate can now read characters and translate to English on the screen. Local sailors were enthusiastic and very helpful. Springtime is festival season in Japan, and with beautiful architecture, colorful flags, and public art everywhere, we were constantly treated to beautiful sights. These wooden tubs are actually historic boats now used to ferry visitors on a tour of the harbor at Sado Island. Many of the ports we visited were used only by fishing boats. We met so many charming and friendly people. While visiting Japan seemed daunting due to language and boat regulations before arrival, in reality, it was worth all the effort, and we consider Japan a sailing destination worthy of many months of exploration. As our visas expired and the weather was appropriate, we set out into the North Pacific and headed to the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, at the end of May 2021. We saw many marine mammals, humpback whales, orcas, and sei whales. Recently, off the coast of Portugal and Spain, there have been some orca whales attacking boats and tearing their rudders off. As we saw many whales on this passage, we hoped word had not reached the Pacific whales about the sport of rudder bashing. We landed at Attu Island, the westernmost part of Alaska. It's interesting that these westernmost islands are in the Eastern Hemisphere, but the dateline has been drawn around these islands to coordinate them to the same day as the rest of the United States. The island was deserted and beautiful, with lots of evidence of past military presence. We hopped up the Aleutian chain of islands, anchoring in wonderful wild places. We were back on US soil, but saw no other people as we traveled. Our path was the shortest route to Seattle, a great circle. This route is heavily traveled by container ships, and we were well aware that during the previous winter, some hundreds of containers had been washed off ships in this part of the ocean. Every sailor dreads a bump in the night that could lead to sinking. We were feeling lucky we never saw any. Finally, we reached the island of Unalaska and the busy port of Dutch Harbor. Here we crossed our outbound track and completed an eastbound circumnavigation. We celebrated with a beer at the Norwegian Rat Saloon and enjoyed reunions with friends. After receiving vaccines in Unalaska, we sailed home, directly across the Gulf of Alaska to the Salish Sea. It was a fast, easy passage. We were grateful to be back in our calm, protected home waters. We had sailed many miles and endured the cold of the Arctic, the heat of the Red Sea in summer, and the upheaval of COVID-19. We had endured months of quarantines. Our Irene had taken care of us through many gales, and our sailing team of 2 had performed well and remained intact. Wind, weather, officialdom, and COVID had thrown some challenges at us, but we had handled them well. We declared our adventure a success. Our circuit of the world was not always comfortable, but was mostly safe and always interesting. Thank you for listening to our story of exploration and endurance. That's it.
That was incredible. We have a bunch of questions for you.
Yay, questions.
Yeah, let me run through them. First was, like when you were in Saint Malo, about what day in your journey were you? How many weeks, months in were you?
That was July of 2019. So that was, we left to go through the Northwest Passage in June of 2017. And so that was about 2 years into our trip.
Got you. And then, what is Irene's draft? What do you draw?
6 feet.
6. And then a question about customs. How did you handle customs?
It's different in every country, and we're patient and polite and sometimes bemused and confused, but we always get through somehow.
Peter has a policy, and his policy is the officials need to tick every box, and our job is to help them do that, whatever that means. So in Argentina, on our first circumnavigation, in order to be allowed to leave the country, we had to hoist the Argentine flag to the top of our main mast. And I asked him to test the halyard to make sure it works, and he said no, because that's where our flag belongs. It should be the highest. And Peter looked at me and said, "We're hoisting that flag, Ginger." And we did.
Which Greek islands did you visit?
Kyklades, several of the small islands, small island chain called Kyklades that were very interesting.
We basically went from Sicily straight across
to the Peloponnesian,
and then stayed at that latitude, cleared the peninsula and stayed at that latitude and went directly across to Turkey. I don't think I can zoom into this part of the map, but it was pretty much for us a straight line. We only had 30 days in Greece, and with the wind and the weather, and it took us a week to clear in. The officials didn't want to come to our town, so we sat for a week. But we only had 30 days to get out of Europe, and so with the wind, with the weather pattern that was happening in the fall, it was pretty much just a straight shot across, and then we would shelter from wind and keep going. But fantastic ports to visit. We left at Simi Island, right next to Turkey. So that was a long answer.
Did you see evidence of refugee crossings in the Aegean?
We did. There were a lot of people living on the sidewalks at Simi. And in fact,
Speaking of customs, in Greece, they did not visit our boat. We were directed to go visit the customs office.
To leave.
To depart. Yeah, and the Greek government had allowed refugees arrived by a rubber boat to camp around that office. They were living on the stairs and under tables, and
the customs office was passing out food to them. They were
Yeah.
making 2 hot meals a day and passing out fresh fruit and vegetables.
mhm.
And the kids were running freely up and down the stairs and into the office and helping themselves to food and water.
And
But it was really a tough situation for them. And they were one of the Simi Island was receiving a lot of refugees, and their rubber boats were tied up in the quay.
And as a boat guy, those rubber boats were very interesting to me. They were brand new. They'd been built only for passage to get into the EU somehow.
Wow.
And they were at a distance, they would look like a normal
Zodiac.
Zodiac or
A big one, a big
a
Zodiac,
big
40 feet
professionally.
long.
But you get up close and you realize they were handmade with like scissor cuts from inner tubes to be patched together with just the wobbliest plywood floor.
The thinnest
And-
plywood you could buy.
Yep, and quite marginal. I wouldn't want to go to sea in one.
No.
And
They had 40 or 50 people in them. It was really something to see it firsthand. And the
Oh.
police, we had to go talk to the police as well, and they were living on the covered patio of the police station because it was hot and sunny there.
mhm.
And we weren't sure we were in the right place, but we had to walk through all these people living on the deck to
Mhm.
talk to the police. It was really dramatic and very difficult for everyone.
As we sailed, we were prepared for the possibility of encountering a boat.
And we heard calls on the radio that there were some boats in the area when we were traveling.
We're happy enough not to have that happen. We were lucky.
What were the dimensions of those boats?
Maybe
40
25 to 35 feet long.
And
Just,
8 feet wide, maybe.
Yeah, and freeboard maybe a foot and a half. Quite risky stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we saw also the discarded life preservers. Once they got ashore, they'd leave them on the beach or on the street or whatever. They were everywhere.
Wow. Did you happen to visit, and I'm going to say this wrong, I think, Amorgos? Amorgos.
No, we
No.
didn't go there.
Okay. Let's see. How long do you think it'll be until cruising can be back to normal post-COVID? Is it still very restrictive?
Anybody's guess. I think maybe normal won't be the right word. It will probably be different. But right now it's quite difficult in some parts of the world, and it's also difficult to predict what will be closed and what will be open. Some countries have gone through several cycles of, okay, you can cruise here, no, you can't get out, and that sort of thing. So I guess if we were cruising out in the world right now, we'd still be, it would be our main worry, how to proceed.
And we heard just in the last couple of days from friends who are stuck someplace, and we're hearing regularly about people who can't proceed forward, can't go back.
Mhm.
So it's definitely not, I mean, in some parts of the world it might be okay, but it's definitely not normal in a lot of places, still very much closed. When we arrived in Alaska, we were surprised to learn, so I guess I should go back. In Japan, they were allowing Canadians and Americans to come by boat only, but nobody was really allowed into the country. And I believe that's because it's a natural route home from the Pacific for boats to go home. And they recognized that. And they said, you're allowed for 90 days and you need to go. You need to keep moving. And they really, I asked them at one point, if we're a little bit late, can we extend our visa? And they did not want to extend our visa. So luckily we timed it so they didn't have to because of the weather changing for us. When we got to Alaska, we arrived just after an Austrian boat, and they had been told that they could come at that when they left to come to Alaska. And when they arrived, they were told that they were not allowed to arrive by foreign vessel. They were not going to be issued a cruising permit, and they needed to leave. And they said, where should we go? We can't go. And ultimately, they were given a permit to go to one spot and sit there for the duration, for the rest of their visa, which they were given a year visa. But it's really crazy. It has been all summer for people coming. I haven't looked into it now that the US has opened their borders for vessels, but it's been very restrictive, even our country. And I don't think that they're really advertising that, but obviously the Canada-US border has been a good test, though Canada allowed US boats in, the US wasn't allowing any Canadian boats in still until just recently, I believe. So we aren't planning to leave this country for anytime soon.
And how does vaccination status impact the freedom of movement? And did you explore getting vaccines while you were out?
We explored, and it was impossible. We got vaccines as soon as we could, and that was in our own country.
We learned, part of our decision in Turkey to leave was that anybody who got COVID was treated automatically with hydroxychloroquine injections, and you could not refuse to get them. And at that time, it was still known to be experimental, and we didn't want to participate in that. Peter did have surgery when we were in Turkey, and that went really well, but we didn't want to explore COVID treatment in Turkey. And then in Singapore, we would have loved to have gotten vaccinated. They were just starting to vaccinate the population, but we were not considered residents and we were not allowed ashore. So there was no way for us to get a vaccine there. And widely, as we heard reports in from other boats, from other friends, people were not able to get vaccines unless they were residents of the country, and foreigners were not being offered vaccines, and you could not get them from your embassy. So we were really grateful to get to Alaska and get them. The Austrian boat, our friends who arrived at Alaska Dutch Harbor just before us, they were able to get vaccinated. In fact, the clinic there, the woman was in charge of the vaccines for all the Aleutian Islands, and she was offering COVID shots to anyone, any person on a ship who wanted to get a shot. So she was doing a service that we as sailors who hadn't been able to get them really felt was altruistic, allowing sailors to get vaccinated, because at that time, a lot of commercial ship crew had been stuck aboard vessels for over a year. And we were certain that vaccine status was going to become an issue for everyone. You can't travel. There's a catch-22 right now. You have to have a vaccine to get back into the States by airplane, but you can't get a vaccine where you are. So that was another long answer. Sorry.
It's a complex issue. So let's see, what was the largest maintenance issue?
Probably the biggest fail was eventually our water maker was unrepairable. And we lost it just as we were entering Red Sea, Indian Ocean, right where such a machine would have been really valuable.
We had actually decided that we were going to cross the Atlantic back to the Caribbean likely before COVID happened. And Peter famously said, that's okay. We won't be doing any long hot passages. We won't be worried about we won't need to worry about more water than we can carry in our tanks. And it turned out we really needed to worry about water for those 2 months at sea from Turkey to Indonesia. So it turned out to be an issue.
It's impressive. How did you make your water last?
We didn't take showers for 2 months, and I'm sure that contributed to our heat rash, but it wasn't really an option. We were hoping to collect rainwater, and it didn't rain until after we crossed past Sri Lanka and almost to the Malacca Straits. And then we got rain, so much rain, that we were collecting it, showering in it, filling all of our bottles. Actually, at Djibouti, at the south end of the Red Sea, we thought we would get water there, and they don't have potable water on tap. So we were forced to buy bottled water, which we didn't want to do because we needed to fill our tanks. We didn't need all this plastic. But we were so grateful that we had purchased that water because we were getting, just drinking and cooking, not showering or doing anything extravagant with it. But we used a lot of it. By the time it rained, we were getting low and definitely rationing water.
What was the longest crossing in days? Did you get that? What was the longest crossing in days?
Well, it was 2 months from Turkey to Singapore, but between longest crossing in day,
Yeah.
our longest crossing was probably nonstop without anchoring at night, was probably from Chile to Hawaii on our first voyage, which was 42 days and 6,400 nautical miles. That was our longest nonstop, no anchoring trip.
And was that just the two of you?
All of our sailing has been just the two of us.
They'd like to have you, sorry, another question came in. Only ask this if you think it's appropriate.
Does that mean only answer it if we think it's appropriate?
Absolutely. How has the journey changed your relationship?
That's a good question, actually. We moved aboard 17 years ago and started sailing then. So this is our second circumnavigation. And the first circumnavigation, there were some dramatic events in our life, people getting ill, and it made us think about life trajectory. And Peter said, let's go sailing. And I thought, oh, well, we're going to die out there. But Peter really wants to go, so we'll go. And so that first trip, I was really going for Peter. And I enjoyed it, but I had a lot of fear. And the second trip, Peter thought that we were done after the first trip. And we came home and I said, oh, no, I love this boating life. And there's so many places that we still wanted to sail. You can see from the blue line, we didn't go anywhere north. And we really wanted to go, as we said earlier, the original idea was, let's go to the Mediterranean and sip some coffee in a cafe and look at our boat. And we hadn't done that. So the second trip, we went as a team. It was the two of us traveling. And it was far more pleasant for both of us, I think, to be working as a team, truly working. I mean, we were working as a team the first time, obviously. We just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. So we've been a team for a long time. But the last trip we did had more challenges that scared me more than the first trip and brought us closer together. And we work well as a team. And on passages, we don't see each other very often because one of us is on watch and the other one's cooking or sleeping. So passages are not hard for communication.
And what was your watch schedule?
4 on, 4 off, just like the Navy. We have a ship's bell clock, and we use the 8 hours. Every 30 minutes, it chimes up to 8, and then it starts over. Noon, 4, 8, and 12. Those are our shift changes.
They'd like you to talk about Cape Horn.
Oh. We got down. What do you want me to talk?
Sure.
So we got down to Estrecho Estados Unidos, which is just at the corner as you're coming south from Argentina. And as we turned the corner into Beagle Channel, we had an engine failure. Our mixing elbow, where the exhaust mixes with the water, blew a hole, and there was an explosion. It was midnight. It was watch change, and it was snowing. And we were both in the cockpit because it was watch change. And this explosion happened, and then black smoke started pouring out from down below. And Peter threw open, we killed the engine, threw open the hatch, and all this black smoke was billowing out of the boat. And I thought, oh my God, we're on fire in the Beagle Channel. We're going to die because we're 30 miles from the nearest person, and it's snowing and it's midnight. And it was blowing too. So we got the sail out. I think we were motor sailing, but we shut the motor down. We were motor sailing because it was a headwind, of course. And it was fine. It was just exhaust filling the cabin with black smoke. So nothing of cloth wiping down every surface won't fix. But we had to tack up the Beagle Channel for the next 36 hours, 25 tacks to get 20 miles. And we anchored a couple of times for the tide, for the current to be going our direction. And so that was the challenging part. We made it there. We found a guy who did an incredible, not repair, because our part was shot. He was hammering on it saying cancer, cancer. And I was thinking, that's my cancer. I need it to get home. And he built a new part for us that fit in exactly. And it was incredible. So that was our exciting part of getting down there to the south end.
But I can talk about Cape Horn itself was actually going around the island, and the actual point was easy for us. We were in a light headwind and sailing upwind, and there's a place you can actually land if conditions allow, and
go up to the lighthouse,
to go up and get your passport stamped and that sort of thing. But there was a tremendous swell running, and we couldn't land our dinghy in that.
And with just two of us, we couldn't anchor. You would have to have somebody on the boat standing off, and so then it wouldn't be any fun for one of us to go. So
we sailed on by. Actually, these days with good weather forecasting and the availability of sheltered coves on either side, it's not the drama that it was for the square riggers.
Unless you are actually going around nonstop.
If you're going nonstop,
by then we were tourists, so right. We did it the
day by day there.
Yeah.
So allowing for COVID, well, actually, you've spoken to it. I was trying to think of what was different between your first and second navigations. And Ginger, I think you spoke to, certainly from your perspective, how different the trip was. Peter, how about you, setting aside COVID?
Yeah, the difference to the sailor is the first trip was sort of mostly downwind, a lot of trade wind sailing, mostly in the southern hemisphere.
Nice swimming, warm water, snorkeling.
The trip through the Pacific is what they call the milk run, which is basically the easiest passage across, and it was all good stuff. The second one was deliberately picking tough sections like the Northwest Passage and North Atlantic crossing rather than a mid-Atlantic crossing is considered a little bit tougher.
And that wasn't because we were looking for tough things. That was partly because we said, we couldn't go to Antarctica. Let's go to the Arctic before it's more regulated. Mm-hmm. We'd really like to see Northern Europe, so let's go to Scotland for the winter. We've heard great things from friends who've been there. And then we ended up in Turkey because we thought we might be allowed to stay in Italy as crew aboard our boat, and they said no. So we had to keep going. And then COVID, of course, changed, and we just continued on because it was the Suez Canal was only 3 days from Turkey. We were afraid if we went back to the Caribbean and to Panama that they might close and not let us through. And we did not want to go around South America again. So kind of made it. And then that the rest of it obviously was pretty challenging too, and mostly a lot of upwind for the whole circumnavigation.
Let's see, we have a question from someone who I know to be a former coastie, Coast Guarder. What influential books did you read during the trip?
Intellectual books?
What type of books?
Influential. So
Influential. Boy, we got on the first trip, we had just paperback books. And so we were reading whatever we could get that was in English. On this trip, we had Kindles. And so we had a lot of good reading material.
Yeah, it's interesting that the public library system was able to feed us books. All that time we were quarantining and not allowed ashore.
Any place we had internet, we had library access, which was pretty cool.
And it's wonderful. I mean, I'm trying to think of what I read, and crazy stuff like there's a genre of feminist science fiction, and I loved it. And there's trying to remember the name of the series, but
was it by Octavia Butler?
I don't think so. Ships that are like wooden ships that sail and have souls, and yeah, I'll look it up, but
great.
I've lost the name. But anyway, we were reading lots of fiction and not so much anything practical, because there's nothing we could do.
When things were tough, we were looking for light reading to take our mind off of things being tough.
Escape.
Yeah. But we read hundreds of books. So I guess I would make a horrible librarian, because anytime somebody asked for a recommendation, my mind would go blank.
Yeah.
We kind of followed favorite authors like Michael Pollan, and I don't know. I did try to get some nautical books, but those are harder to get from the library as ebooks.
And did you stream any TV shows or movies?
Oh, in Singapore, we were able to get basically an unlimited SIM card for $25 a month. So we used it heavily in Singapore. And any place, where we were stopped for the winter, we generally got internet. Generally, it depends on how the pricing was, if we could afford to stream or not. But in Singapore, it was hot, and there were passenger ferries going by every 5 minutes that threw a huge wake. They would throw a cup off the table when they went by. So a lot of our time in Singapore was spent checking the internet or watching videos, because we couldn't really do much else during the day when the boats were going by.
It was fun to watch a British series called Orkney, maybe.
Shetlands.
Yeah, Shetlands. Yes. We saw some of the landscapes that we'd sailed through.
We binged plenty of Netflix series.
Yeah.
Nice. So how do you bankroll your adventures?
Oh.
Well, we're just working people that saved up as much as we could and are as thrifty as we can be. And
we had a house for 12 years that we sold in 2005 when we moved aboard.
And a rental house that we sold.
And so we've been very careful. And when we came back from our first circumnavigation, we both went back to work and lived as frugally as we possibly could. My first vacation when I was 20 years old, from my first real job that had vacation, I was so excited. And I said, Peter, where should we go? Are we going to go to Hawaii, or maybe fly someplace that I haven't been, the Caribbean or someplace cool? And Peter said, oh no, those things are very expensive. We're going hiking in the Olympics. So that's how we bankrolled the trip.
Gotcha. And have you had to work at all while you were sailing?
That's not easy anymore, really. I think some of the cruising books written in years past that they would recommend, yeah, you can pick up money by working in this country or that country, but most countries absolutely forbid it, and doing something under the table is pretty risky. So we were never able to.
Also, we moved pretty quickly. So stopping for winter was partly recuperating and partly just working on our own boat to keep moving. And typically for a winter, there's enough to do that we barely get, well, we don't get through the whole list before we start going again. And it's very difficult to source things in a lot of places that we stop. So that it just takes a lot of time, especially a foreign country, to get into, you know, figuring out the groceries and the language and whatever. But mostly our winters were 5 months or so. And that's not a long time to get the boat ready, get us ready, and get moving again. And writing a blog and planning our next route and just, you know, day-to-day living. If we'd stopped someplace for longer and gotten to know that place, perhaps we could have looked into working, but we were moving pretty fast.
Yes. I put 2 questions in the chat for the attendees. 1, how did you find out about the program? And 2, would you recommend the program to a friend? So if you get a second and could go ahead and answer those questions, all the participants, that'd be super great for our records at the library. And if there aren't any more questions for Irene and Peter, Ginger and Peter.
It's okay, I answered to Irene too.
I just want to tell you how thankful we are that you spent this evening with us. It was fascinating, and everyone participating has been putting in the chat window how much they're enjoying it as well. So sincere thanks and congratulations. Peter and Ginger, they won an award. And have you won it twice? The Circumnavigation Award from the Cruising Club of America, or just the once?
We actually received the Far Horizons Award in 2019, which was for our Northwest Passage trip. And we have been recognized for circumnavigating twice by the Cruising Club of America. So that was very, very nice. It's a huge honor to get the Far Horizons Award and to be recognized for circumnavigating as well. And I wanted to say a special thank you to our friends, Carrie and Don, who let us use their house and their internet to do this, because we don't have internet beyond our cell phones and we didn't think it could handle Zoom.
Thank you to your host from us. And one of our participants highly recommends your Facebook page.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Facebook blog?
Sydney, did you mean their Facebook page or their blog?
Our blog is at oceanswell.blogspot.com. If anybody is interested in looking at our blog that we documented our voyage on that blog.
Yeah, oceanswell.blogspot.com. I put it in the chat so that folks, and it should be linked on some social media we did as well. Oh, and one more question. If you had one country to go back to, which one would it be?
Oh, that's impossible. That's impossible.
Peter always says his favorite country, at least from our first circumnavigation, was Madagascar. I would have to say Japan was a huge dark horse surprise. But we really loved Scotland. Ireland was amazing. Turkey was stupendous. I mean, Turkey, they were such amazing hosts there.
And there's
Australia, I mean, we barely touched Australia.
There's so many countries
South America,
we
all
didn't
of it.
get to visit.
Right.
We wanted to go further north to Norway, Finland,
yeah,
Estonia,
but time, it all takes
places.
time.
Yeah.
So I guess the question would be, where would you not go again?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So answer that.
No, yeah.
So would your timeline have changed if COVID hadn't come? Would you have stayed out longer?
Likely because we ended up sailing past places that would have pulled us in and we would have dawdled. So
Yeah, we expected another season in the Mediterranean. Maybe we would have crossed to the Caribbean, maybe not.
mhm.
And we wanted to go back to South Carolina. We loved South Carolina. It's not another
Mhm.
country, but it felt like one to us.
We've never been to the Caribbean, and
Yeah.
that's such a sailor's destination. That's
Oh,
always,
Cuba. We wanted to go to Cuba,
yeah.
San Blas. Anyway, there are so many
Anyway.
places to see still.
Truly. And I just realized I sent the blog to just one person, so not everyone should have the blog address. Well, terrific. I hope you have a lovely evening with your friends. Please thank them from us as well. And
Of
we hope
course.
to see you out on the water or in Port Townsend, or come to Orcas Island and visit us at the library. That'd be super cool. And thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you, Carol.
Oh, our pleasure. You guys take care.
You too. Good
You
night.
too.
Okay, good night.